Today we are talking about letter H, which is Gary Heidnik. Gary dropped out of 9th grade and went into the Army for 14 months as a medic. He got honorably discharged and was medically diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. He met his wife through a matrimonial service, but their marriage rapidly deteriorated when she found Heidnik in bed with 3 other women. In 1976, he was charged with aggravated assault. For shooting the tenant of a house he offered for rent, grazing his face. In 1978, he signed his girlfriend's disabled sister out of a mental institution. He kept her prisoner in his basement. He was arrested but spent 3 years of his incarceration in a mental institution. Beginning in November 1986, he abducted 6 women and held them in his basement. The women were abused, beaten, and tortured in front of each other. 1 woman died due to starvation, torture, and untreated fever. He dismembered her and ground up her meat and mixed it with dog food and fed it to the surviving victims. One of the women escaped on March 24, 1987. She went straight to the police and Heidnik was arrested. He was convicted of 2 counts of murder in 1988 and was sentenced to death. He was executed on July 6, 1999. And that's the story of Gary Heidnik. Today on the Bloody Alphabet, we're talking about letter I, and it's Javad Iqbal. He was a Pakistani serial killer who was found guilty of sexual abuse and murder of 100 children. In December of 1999, he sent a letter to police and newspaper confessing to the murders of 100 boys. The age range was 6 to 16. He claimed to have strangled and dismembered his victims. They were mostly runaways and orphans living on the streets. He disposed of their bodies using vats of hydraulic acid and then dumped the remains in a local river. When the police went to his house, they found bloodstains on the walls and the floor. They found photographs of his victims and 2 vats of acid with partially dissolved human remains left inside. Police launched what was, at the time, the largest manhunt Pakistan had ever witnessed. There were 4 accomplices, teenage boys who ended up sharing Javed's 3-bedroom flat. They were arrested, and within days, one of them died by jumping out of a window. He turned himself in because he feared for his life and thought that the police were going to kill him. He claimed that the whole thing was a giant hoax and that he was innocent. He ended up being found guilty and was ordered to die via strangulation. They said his body should be cut up into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid under the legal concept of eye for an eye. And that's the story of Javad Iqbal. Today on the Bloody Alphabet, it's letter J, and we are talking about Janine Jones. Janine was a nurse and she worked at several medical clinics in and around San Antonio, Texas. She practiced possibly the most heinous life and death games in American history. She injected innumerable babies with life-threatening drugs. She seemed to thrill in putting the small children in mortal danger and thrusting herself into a role of a hero when the children pulled through. Unfortunately, many of them did not. There was multiple investigations, and she was even dismissed from 2 separate medical facilities when there was suspicion of infant deaths surrounding her. However, this did not stop her from injecting babies with chemicals that caused cardiac arrest and hemorrhaging. She was eventually directly accused by a fellow nurse before she was dismissed from the Bexar County Medical Center. They conducted 3 separate investigations, but could never implicate Jones directly. She was finally charged with murder in January of 1984 when she poisoned a 4-week-old child. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison and then earned another 60 years in the following trial. The total amount of innocent babies she killed will actually never be known. And that is the story of Janine Jones. Today on the Bloody Alphabet, we're talking about letter K, and it is Peter Curtin, also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf. At the age of 9, he drowned 2 boys, but it was attributed to an accident, so Peter was cleared of any blame. In May of 1913, he was looking for somewhere to rob, but in turn he found a 10-year-old little girl named Christine and killed her. He went to jail for smaller crimes, and when he got out in 1921, he met his wife. Between 1925 and 1928, he attacked 4 women in Dusseldorf, strangling them to the point of unconsciousness during intercourse. He then went on to killing 3 young girls, and one of them was only 5 years old. He finally got caught after he tried to sleep with a woman named Maria. She didn't want to sleep with him, but he ended up sexually assaulting her. He ended up letting her go without harming her because she didn't fight back. Maria went to police and led them straight to Peter. Peter ended up getting away, but he told his wife everything that he had done. He wanted his wife to turn him in so she could get the reward money. Peter ended up going to trial in April of 1931 and was sentenced to death. He was beheaded by a guillotine on July 2nd, 1931. And that is the story of Peter Curtin. Today on the Bloody Alphabet, we are talking about letter L, and it is Bobby Joe Long. In his early life, he lived in many different places, and he committed at least 50 rapes as the classified ad rapist. He would answer classified ads for small appliances, and if he found a woman home alone, he would rape her. He ended up moving to the Tampa area in 1983, where he would average about 30 to 35 homicides a year in the 80s. During one 8-month period, he was averaging a murder every other week. In 1984, he was trolling for victims near bars. He would persuade these victims to get into his car, where he then took them to his apartment. He would brutally attack them. After that, he would stage their body in unique positions as if they were on display. He was finally captured, and DNA evidence finally linked him to multiple cases. He was arrested on November 16, 1984, and charged with sexual battery and kidnapping of Lisa McVeigh. He then received 26 life sentences without the possibility of parole and 7 life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He was finally executed by lethal injection on May 23, 2019. And that's the story of Bobby Joe Long. Today on the Bloody Alphabet, we're talking about letter M, and it is Charles Manson. Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother was just 16 years old. According to Manson, he had a really rough upbringing, and his mom was in and out of jail. He's also mentioned that she didn't really want him. He ended up living with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. Beginning at the age of 9, he spent most of his life in juvie. This was due to armed robbery, burglary, and even auto theft. He was released from prison in 1967, and he moved to San Francisco, where he attracted a small but devoted group of followers. By 1968, he had become the leader of the Family. This was a religious cult dedicated to studying and implementing his eccentric religious teachings. He preached the coming of an apocalyptic race war that would devastate the United States and leave the Family in a position of dominant power. In 1969, the Family carried out several murders on Manson's orders. One of the more well-known victims was an actress named Sharon Tate. The Family showed up at her home, killed her, and 4 other people. His reasoning behind killing all these people was to start the race war. He directed 4 members of his family to go to a specific address in Los Angeles and to kill everyone there. The previous owner of this house was a man named Terry Melcher, and this is a man that Manson did not like. This is what led the Family to killing Sharon Tate and the 4 other victims. In 1971, Manson was sentenced to death. However, following this, capital punishment in California was abolished. His sentence later changed to life in prison. He ended up dying on November 19, 2017 due to cardiac arrest and respiratory failure at the age of 83. And that is the story of Charles Manson.